Okay, first question here, right? What percentage of the males in the sample own their own home? So let me hit the model solution, 132 out of 182, which is 72.5%. Let me show you the rubric part of it, okay? Part A, E, P, or I. E, the response correctly calculates the percentage of males that own their own home and shows work. P, the response correctly calculates the percentage of males own their own home but does not show work, or shows work and uses 132 in the numerator, or uses 132 in the numerator, but uses either 254 or 348 in the denominator. Wrong denominator, but they got the right numerator. They're actually going to give you a P for that, okay? And then I, it says, just I is otherwise, okay? Real quick, let's look at student examples. I don't know why it's blue. 132 out of 182, 72.5%. EP or I? Good? Yeah, E. Yep.
Does it matter how many decimals you go?
Yeah, I was getting ready to say that. Yep, I'm getting ready to go over that. And then this one here, 72.5 of the males. EP or I? P, what are they missing?
No work.
No work. So here's a couple of words that I want to make sure that I cover that I don't think I have yet. Rounding, they don't care in this class. They don't care about that. So if you want to do 0.725, if you want to do 0.7, you're probably starting to get a little iffy, right? But rounding, they don't care. I like to do about 3, typically. But of course, if that one stops at 5, then I think we're good. I don't say 3 always because sometimes we'll get 0.00002. Well, you don't want to put 0, okay? Because in statistics, that means something different than 0, okay? And then here's my words of advice. Never, ever, 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 never, no under any circumstances, have a naked answer. It will always be wrong in this class. Always, okay? So, case in point, 72.5, if you just put that and you did not put a fraction, they're going to get you every time. A lot of times, if you just have the fraction, you're okay. I think this particular time, they wanted the actual percent. Y'all good enough with that, okay? So again, teaching moments that we just want to make sure that we carry on throughout the entire year, okay? The second question, make a graph to compare the distributions, okay? So their rubric, they used that graph, a side-by-side bar graph, separated by males and females. Here's what the rubric says. B, essentially correct that the response includes an appropriate type graph. Bar graph, segmented bar graph, pie chart. In other words, something that you can make that does what? Categorical data, right? Categorical data. If you made one that's they didn't even say modified box plot, but that's one. I think this was made before the modifieds came out, okay? So you got to have an appropriate graph. And then here's the other things you have to, it has to be reasonably accurate. Reasonably accurate. Like we're not going to get a ruler out and make sure it's dead on, but just get close, right? It includes proper labels. So we got to make sure we label things. And here's the tricky one, makes it easy to compare the conditional distributions of housings. In other words, you have to use relative frequencies. You cannot use frequencies. Because there were, I forget, more females or more males or vice versa, right? You cannot compare numbers if they're different numbers. You have to compare percentages, okay? Always. Thing. They shouldn't. However, if they're stacked, like if you're doing the males, both males, then that's okay for them to test, but it should be separated by the categories. Fair enough? And again, I don't think they're going to do a whole lot on that. It didn't say anything about the rubric on that, right? As long as you can compare. Here is this person's graph right here. They put the 73.5, they put the 72.5, they put 26.5, they put the 27.5, they put males and females. Eh? Yeah, it's missing a little bit of labeling. They gave him a P for it. Missing a little bit of labeling. It's just not the clearest it could be. Okay? Hit me. My guess is, well, here, we'll do the commentary. Okay? I think that's sample number 1. In part B, the response includes an accurate segmented bar chart that uses relative frequencies. However, because the labeling is incomplete, part B was scored a P. I'm thinking it's because of the, the sidebars over in here. I think it's just that part.
So would you like number that?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, put 0.5 in the middle, and that. This one has to be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense now. But so then we have to convert everything.
Correct.
forward?
Yep.
Okay.
And that's why they're leading you, because there's a 72.5, right? That's that 72.5. They typically lead you to what you're going to need something later on. Typically, okay? Check this graph out, though. E, P, or I? They didn't use relative frequencies. They used frequencies. Okay with that? So it's not a bad graph. If you used a correct graph, these bars are going to be taller than these bars because there's more of them. So it's hard to compare. We gotta get relatives in there. Okay. All right. Next part. This part, I don't like their rubric at all, to be honest with you, especially at the stage we're in this class. Okay. Using your graph on part A, describe the relationship between gender and housing status. If you used all those numbers, I'm not sure there is much of an association or relationship between gender and status at all. Like, I don't know if it matters if it's a male or female or what the difference is. Okay, here's what the rubric says. Again, I'm not too as concerned with this one yet in this course, right? Essentially correct that the response correctly compares appropriate conditional distribution. Remember, we talked about the conditionals. If we know this, if we know they're male, then this. If we know they're female, right? There is no association or a very weak association because these distributions are so similar. Now, on the flip side of that, a lot of times what they'll do is if you made an inappropriate graph, but you compared those distributions, you're okay. In other words, if these distributions are really tall and these are not as tall, and you said that knowing that you're a male, you're more than likely, because you described your graph, they don't double ding you for that kind of information. Y'all follow what I'm saying, right? I mean, you know what you're talking about. You just missed something before it. If you miss it before it, you're going to miss this one. Well, they don't want to, it doesn't daisy chain down, right? Because you missed this, they're not going to just mark off all this other stuff. If you use that information, and that goes also in this class, right? If you don't know how to do something, but you need that down below, either make it up, you're not going to get the points anyway, but you need that number down here, then we'll use that number. They're not going to get you for that. Okay? Partially correct that the response correctly states there is no association or weakened association, but does not explain it in the conditional distributions are very similar, or the response states there is an association because the frequencies or relative frequencies of the two genders are different. But again, that kind of goes off if you did it correct. I mean, all that kind of goes hand in hand. I'm not so concerned with that, right? Incorrect that the response doesn't compare appropriate conditional. What I tell you about comparing, right? Talk about the high, talk about the low, and talk about the similarities, differences, more, less, or about the same, right? Whenever you compare, don't give numbers higher, lower, about the same, okay? And I think that one was a little bit higher, but if you want to say they're about the same, that's okay. Yep.
What if I say there's not a strong relationship since the relative frequencies are similar?
That's okay. Yeah. And make sure we've always put it in context, right? Between the males and females, that kind of stuff too. Okay. And then the third or the last one, again, I'm not too concerned with this one either. So the two-way table summarizes the relationship between marital status and housing. So now we've changed from married, not married, own, rent, changed it a little bit, okay? For the members of this sample, is the relationship between marital status and housing status stronger or weaker than the relationship between gender and the housing status you described in part C? And then justify your choice by the two-way tables. In other words, you prove it. Prove how you're going to, don't just say, show me, right? Mathematically, verbally, somehow or another, graphically even, okay? So here's what they said on this one. Essentially correct that the response says the association between marital status and housing status is stronger and describes the association between marital status and housing status using numerical, graphical, or graphical evidence, compares the two associations using numerical or graphical evidence on the differences of the percent of So you describe the association and then you compare it by using numerical or graphical evidence. Partially correct that the response says there is an association between marital status and housing. However, I'm going to exactly give one of the two components listed above. I'm not too concerned with that one.
So what are we most likely to see on that test?
What's that now?
What are we most likely
Yes. Yes, you're going to see some questions on your test. I can't tell you that.
Like which ones should we pay attention to? The graphing one? Like, oh, we're definitely have to graph.
You're not going to have to graph, right? We talked about that. And we're not going to do association, correct.
So what are we?
My bet is describe a distribution, maybe compare a distribution, right? We talked about that when we did the notes, right? I don't even remember.
Have you looked at the test?
Not since last year. Not since last year. That's why I said this. Use this more as a teaching as opposed to teaching about the test. Please don't say, let's see, what was the question you asked before? So we're not going to have to do what on the test? No, I know. I just don't want to answer it completely incorrectly. If y'all remember when we went over those sections, I said something. I said you're not going to have to make a histogram or a dot plot or something like that, right? Okay. That's true. You may have to graph. You may have to graph. It might be like one of the easiest graphs you can make. Dot plot's really easy if you have a small amount of data, right? That is fairly large. Okay. I think we're good. Multiple choice and free response, you better know how to find outliers. Right? Y'all good with all that, right? Make sure you know how to find outliers. Make sure you know how to describe a distribution. Make sure you know how to compare distributions. Make sure you remember what type of sampling and what sampling is used for. Why do we sample randomly? That kind of stuff. Larger or smaller samples are better. Yada, yada, yada. All that kind of stuff that you kind of know already. Really, really, really easy test.